Never miss out on an opportunity like a good recession. Jack Welch. What's up, guys? So today we're talking about how to survive a recession. The title says 3 ways to prepare for a recession. Now, there's way more than 3. That's just a good title. So I'm gonna give you my bonus strategies, of course. But I think before we get started, it's important to know what a recession is and some of the indicators that suggest maybe we're due for a recession or how we're coming to that conclusion. And we'll go into these in more detail in the next video. But just to throw it out there, how you might gauge a recession is, so first of all, I mean, one of the big ones is the federal fund rate, the interest rate. It's been bottomed out for basically since COVID kind of hit the US, and we really couldn't afford to do that, having bottomed it out in 2008, and it took so long to recover, just up to 2.5%, which is still very low, and then bottomed it out a second time. So it seems like we are, at least according to that, due for a recession, or at least in a slowed economic, we have reduced economic strength in our economy. And when you reduce the interest rate, the intention is to actually boost the economy because of its weakness. The unemployment rate is unusually high. It's been bouncing back and forth over the last few years, but we were very low and now we're very high. And so the unemployment rate would, of course, play right into a weakened economy. The Treasury yield curve, or the inverted yield curve, those are both interesting ones. The smooth U.S. recession probabilities indicator. So there's a bunch. Warren Buffett indicator, debt to revenue ratios. You can look at a chart where we have like bar graphs of debt and a line graph of revenue in America. And currently we have this very sharp downturn in the revenue and some spikes in the debt. So that's not a good thing to have those out of whack. So then there's also an increasing gap between the wealthy and the poor class. If you didn't watch my video about the case for the rich paying the poor kind of thing, is the rich, the billionaires in America, increased their wealth by $1 trillion since March. So they could literally write a check for $3,000 to every American and still be wealthier than they were in March. So that's another indicator that, economy is not strong for everyone, and only the largest economically stable companies are really thriving, while a lot of other stuff is really struggling. So now that we've laid out a few of those things that kind of show maybe impending recession is upon us, nobody can really gauge when that might happen, because there's millions of factors in an economy, and so there's no way for you to sort of time economies and time bears and bulls kind of thing. So essentially, I'm saying that a recession's coming. Well, you could always say that and be right, but it seems to be pretty close, and like I said, it's a fool's game to try and guess exactly when that might happen. But what we do know is that there's patterns throughout history, and we literally have these short-term debt cycles where we kind of borrow lots of money, and then at some point we have to pay that money back, and so that tends to create these normal booms and busts, or short-term debt cycles, or recessions, right? And we get through them. And then there's long-term debt cycles, and those are more like Great Depression type stuff. And a lot of people think we are much closer to a Great Depression than just a typical recession. So that's one reason that I'm kind of gearing up, is like maybe the next recession will be worse than we have grown accustomed to for the last 70 years. But I don't want to be too doomsday either. You never know. We could have a lot of economic growth and boom that's completely unexpected to us right now. Or we could have natural disasters that completely contribute to a downcline. Like, you just don't know. And so it's best to just be prepared. So to jump into some of these things, let's just start with the easy ones, right? Eliminate bad debt. If you have credit cards, high interest loans, things like that, just eliminate them as soon as possible. But that's just good money management anyway. So that's not necessarily specific to a recession. That's being smart. So playing right into that, live by your budget. Don't max out your income. You need to have money left at the end of every month, not month at the end of the money. And so as we're kind of thinking in terms of a recession coming, I like to think of myself and my own expenses and things like that. Could I make ends meet on a worse job, right? Right now I'm in a comfortable job. I seem to make decent money. But if I lose that job because of a recession, could I make ends meet at working at a restaurant or some construction job if construction's still out there, or whatever types of jobs you have access to that are typically stay around, right? Grocery stores, things like that. They stay in business because we all have to eat. But not every industry stays in business, and not every industry is affected the same in a recession. If you remember to 2008, that recession was very focused around the big banks and the housing market. Now that spreads out to a lot of other things, but that was the big industry, right? So I was actually in construction at the time, and the construction market essentially disappeared. And so that was a, bad place to be. But can you make ends meet in a different world, in a different industry? It's a good question to ask yourself, and a good way to live. My wife and I try to make financial decisions based on our sort of lowest level income. And if we can make it work on that, it's a go ahead. If we can't, then we should save and pay cash. Which brings me to my next one, have cash available. You definitely want to have access to some cash for sure. Cash is not a good asset when we're talking about growth and wealth building, but it's the system we use to trade. And so you need to have cash available. The bank is expecting to get paid cash for your mortgage. And if you can't do it, they'll take your house, right? So you want to have cash available so that you can make those payments. Now, every financial advisor across the world basically says you should have an emergency fund, right? I would try and beef that up a little bit as we come into a recession. As you're coming out of a recession, maybe there's a little more hope that hey, I've got a few years before I'm going to need this again. But we've been going on, since 2009 basically, without a really significant recession. And here we are. It seems that we're in it, at least partially with COVID, but it could get worse. We seem due, right? And so you want to beef that emergency fund up. I would try and make sure you've got at least 6 months of living expenses in some sort of cash form that you can access. That way you can make payments without a job. You can eat, you can clothe, right? It's critical that you don't get desperate in a time where many people are desperate, right? Because you're not going to get the value out of the assets you have. Stocks will be down. Gold may be down, real estate might be down. Essentially in a recession, most things come down. There might be a few things that spike because it's the safest place and people run to put their money in it. But most people are going to get less than their value out of most assets. So you don't want to be forced to sell things at that time, at the worst time to sell. You want to sell when things are high and of course buy low. But in a recession, you may not have that option if you don't have access to cash. So make sure you've got something. So that could be your emergency fund, your savings account, your travel fund, your entertainment fund. It could be your short-term investments. I like to keep a certain amount of money in the stock market that's this is sort of like my day trade play money. And if things go bad, I just pull it right out and I'm good to go. I've got that in addition to my emergency fund. So I try to have sort of access to an entire year's worth of living expenses where my family could be comfortable without a job. And, we would, of course, lose a significant amount of wealth, but better than losing your house, better than losing your cars at the worst time to possibly sell. Do your best to have multiple income streams. This is a big one for any kind of wealth building, but especially in a recession, you don't know which things might be hurt the worst, which types of sectors or markets might be affected the worst. And so if you have multiple income streams, maybe some will survive, maybe all will survive, and you'll be one of the lucky ones that can really capitalize in a downturn. but that could be, side hustles, second jobs, freelance. It could be investments, stock market, dividend stocks, things like that, real estate. If you can get your hands on multiple income streams, you're much more safe when it comes to, a time when jobs are disappearing. Your income, those small incomes can really change the world when people are desperate. A couple of non-financial things that you could do is sharpen the saw, as Stephen Covey says. Make sure that you're, sharpening yourself, investing in yourself and your mind, your talent, your connections, so that you're, just slightly better than the competition. If you've never read the book, The Compound Effect, you need to take a look at it. If you're just slightly better than the competition, you don't just make slightly more money, you make exponentially more money. And in a time of a recession, when competition is high for the few jobs that are out there in various sectors, if you're just slightly better, you may be the lucky one that gets the job while everyone else is struggling, right? That also applies to a good economy. If you're slightly better, you might be the one that gets the promotion. You might be the one that wins, right? And so you make exponentially more money. Constantly sharpen the saw, and then keep your network warm. Make connections and keep connections with other people, different industries, people you've worked with, friends haven't connected with for a while. Reach out. Make sure you've got some feelers out there in where people are and what positions may be coming and going and things like that. There's nothing better than having a good network that can refer you to good jobs at any time, much less in a recession. When it comes to your investments, you want to have a diversified portfolio, and not just as diversified across multiple companies in any sector or across multiple sectors, but even like competing assets and various countries. So not all countries are affected the same. Particularly in this case, China seems to be the next strongest market, or at least emerging market. And so they may have some booming companies at the time that America has a decline. So as a protection against sort of all things, you want to get these, as Ray Dalio calls it, an all-weather fund, where you've got multiple asset classes, multiple countries, and you're basically hoping to maintain wealth across all those different assets, because some will surely be hit. Some may do, very well, and others sort of mediocre. And so the goal is to just not lose wealth, right? If you can not lose money, you're going to win. And that is critical in a recession. Not losing money is more the game than making money in a recession, which in that case, you're essentially hanging on to assets and giving yourself the ability to then capitalize on new assets as things start to turn around and look up. Here's the big one that you need to be a savvy investor, money savvy, in order to do this. But in a down economy, that's the best time to make yourself wealthy. Not necessarily that year, but in the years following a recession. Essentially, since the history of America, every time we have a recession, we have a boom right after it. The bottom of the next recession is higher than the bottom of the last recession as far as economic growth, because there is true growth in these booms and busts, okay? And so as we come out of recessions, that's where people make extreme wealth. They're able to acquire assets during the economic sale. Everything is on sale. Houses are on sale, stocks are on sale, gold's on sale. Like, it's all on sale. So if you have the ability to actually acquire assets, that's when you're going to make a lot of money in the coming years. And so in this case, you may be able to leverage your debt in order to make more money. Now, I'm a little hesitant to say that, leverage debt to make more money. It is the Robert Kiyosaki rich dad way. And that's true. But a lot of people become bankrupt from trying to leverage debt. So you need to educate yourself on a market, on an industry, and understand how debt works, how the incomes work, how much can you put down, how much revenue can you get from this asset, things like that. You got to be savvy in order to leverage debt. You can't just get more debt, buy a bunch of junk, consumer debt, stuff like that. That's the opposite of the rich dad way. So don't be confused about how to leverage debt. You need to educate yourself. But there's a couple things. First of all, your debt could actually pad you against, bankruptcy, foreclosure, etc. The bank doesn't really care how much you've paid for your house to date. If it's not paid off and you stop making payments for long enough, they'll take all the money that they've already accepted and the house, right? So in a recession, if you don't have a pad, you may want to withdraw some, do like a cash out refinance and get some money in your hands as a cushion to make sure that you can then continue making those mortgage payments without a job, if that's the scenario that ends up coming your way. So leveraging debt to accumulate assets may be the best way to grow your wealth in the coming recession. So those are the ways to endure a recession or prepare for a recession. And so let me know in the comments which one you liked most, which ways you're preparing to get through this recession and survive it. And also, if you're a YouTuber and you're interested in analytics and help in ranking your videos and understanding how you can compete, I recommend TubeBuddy. So I'll put a link in the description. You can follow that link and get those resources for as little as $4.50 a month. So I definitely recommend that one. All right, guys, so that's my lessons. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.